November 1944. Winter was coming to Camp McCoy, Wisconsin, and 37 German female prisoners knew they wouldn't survive it. They'd been told by their own officers before capture Americans would work prisoners to death in frozen labor camps, deny them adequate clothing, let them freeze as revenge for German atrocities. As temperatures dropped towards zero and the first snow began to fall, Hauptschwester Helga Schneider watched her fellow nurses huddle in their summer-weight prison dresses and prepared for the worst. But when the camp commandant announced mandatory winterization procedures, what happened next shattered everything Helga had been taught about the enemy. Sometimes the cruelest lie isn't what your captors tell you, it's what your own side made you believe before you were captured. Helga Schneider stood at the barracks window watching snow fall for the first time since her capture 3 months ago. The Wisconsin landscape looked nothing like the battlefields of France, where she'd been taken. All that white emptiness felt hostile, alien, deadly. "It's early for snow," Margaret Zimmerman said quietly, appearing beside her. At 19, Margaret was the youngest of their group, captured while serving as a radio operator. "October snow means a harsh winter. We won't survive it," Helga said flatly. She was 32, old enough to remember the stories from the Great War. Prisoner camps where men froze to death, where captors deliberately withheld warm clothing as punishment. "You don't know that. I know what the Americans are capable of. They bombed Dresden. They burned Japanese cities. Why would they treat German prisoners any better?" Helga's breath fogged the window. The propaganda was right about one thing. They're ruthless when they want to be. Around them, 35 other women prepared for evening roll call, their thin prison-issue dresses offering minimal protection against the cold already seeping through the barracks walls. They'd been captured in various circumstances: nurses, communications operators, 1 translator, even 2 Luftwaffe auxiliary workers, all non-combatants, all terrified of the approaching winter. Lieutenant Sarah Patterson, their American liaison officer, entered the barracks with her usual businesslike efficiency. "Ladies, attention please." The women formed ranks slowly, shivering despite the barracks' inadequate heating. "Winter is coming early this year," Patterson said in her careful German. "Camp McCoy temperatures regularly reach -20 Fahrenheit, sometimes colder. The commandant has ordered winterization procedures for all prisoner barracks. Starting tomorrow morning, you'll undergo processing." Helga's stomach clenched. Processing? That could mean anything. Work assignments in the frozen fields, reduction in rations to conserve supplies, relocation to outdoor labor camps. "What kind of processing?" Helga asked, her voice steady despite her fear. "You'll be issued winter clothing appropriate to Wisconsin weather, coats, boots, thermal undergarments. Your barracks will receive upgraded heating systems. And we're implementing a mandatory hot water bathing schedule to prevent illness." Silence. The women stared at Patterson as if she'd spoken in an alien language. "I don't understand," Margaret said slowly. "You're giving us winter clothes, hot water." "Yes, the Geneva Convention requires adequate shelter and clothing for prisoners. Winter here is dangerous. We're not going to let you freeze." Patterson's expression was matter of fact, as if this was the most obvious thing in the world. "Why?" The question escaped Helga before she could stop it. Patterson looked genuinely confused. "Because letting prisoners die of exposure would be a war crime, and because it's the right thing to do." After Patterson left, the barracks erupted in confused speculation. Some women were suspicious. This had to be a trick, a setup, propaganda for Red Cross inspections. Others were cautiously hopeful. A few, like Helga, simply didn't know what to believe. "My brother wrote from the Eastern Front," Margaret said quietly that night. "He said Russian prisoners in our camps were given nothing, no winter clothes, minimal shelter. Thousands died." She looked at Helga. "If that's true, why would the Americans treat us better than we treated theirs? I don't know. Maybe they're not like us. Or maybe the propaganda lied about them, like it lied about everything else." The next morning came, with temperatures below freezing and a bitter wind that cut through the barracks walls. The women lined up outside, shivering violently, convinced they were being marched somewhere to suffer. Instead, they were led to a building Helga had never entered, the camp's quartermaster depot. Inside it was warm, impossibly wonderfully warm, and stacked floor to ceiling were supplies. Each prisoner will be issued the following, the quartermaster sergeant announced, reading from a list. 1 heavy wool coat, 1 pair insulated boots, 2 pairs wool socks, 2 sets thermal underwear, 1 knit cap, 1 pair gloves, 2 blankets, wool, not cotton. He said it so casually, as if handing out survival equipment to enemy prisoners was routine. The distribution took 2 hours. Each woman was measured, fitted properly, given clothing that actually matched their size. When Helga pulled on the heavy coat, thick wool with a quilted lining, buttons that actually worked, a collar that blocked wind, she felt tears prick her eyes. "This is better than what our own army gave us," Margaret whispered, running her hands over the coat's fabric. "My uniform jacket was half this thick. Don't get used to it." An older prisoner named Frau Weber said sharply, "They'll take it back. This is for show, for inspectors. Once the Red Cross visits, we'll be back in rags." But that afternoon, workers arrived at their barracks with heating equipment, actual radiators connected to the camp's central heating system. By evening, the temperature inside was comfortable for the first time since autumn began. And then came the truly shocking announcement. "Bath schedule starts tomorrow," Patterson informed them. "You'll rotate through the shower facility in groups of 10, 20 minutes per group. Hot water is unlimited within your time slot." Hot water. Frau Weber's voice dripped with suspicion. "For prisoners? For human beings," Patterson corrected. "Your women living in close quarters during winter. Proper hygiene prevents disease. Disease spreads to guards, to civilian workers, to everyone. So yes, hot water." That night, Helga lay in her new blankets, thick, warm, genuinely comfortable, and tried to reconcile everything she'd been taught with what she was experiencing. Germans were the superior race. Americans were weak, decadent, cruel to their enemies. The Reich would triumph because it was strong where others were soft. But she was a German prisoner wrapped in an American blanket, about to receive hot water and winter clothing from the enemy who was supposed to let her freeze. Something didn't add up, and Helga was starting to suspect she knew what it was. Before we discover what happened when these women experienced their first hot shower in months, tell us where you're watching from. Whether you're weathering winter cold or enjoying warmer climates, we love knowing where our community of history enthusiasts gathers. The next morning, Helga's group was first for bathing rotation. 10 women filed nervously into the shower facility, a simple but clean building with multiple shower heads, hooks for clothing, and most importantly, steam rising from somewhere inside. 20 minutes, the female attendant said in English, then repeated in broken German. "Water is hot. Soap is here. Towels there. Go." Helga had not had a proper hot shower since her capture 4 months ago. In the field hospital where she'd worked, they'd bathed with cold water and rags. During transport to America, they'd been hosed down once, briefly, with water so cold it hurt. Since arriving at Camp McCoy, they'd made do with basin baths, cold water, quick and miserable. She turned on the shower with trembling hands, expecting lukewarm water at best. What came out was genuinely hot. Not scalding, but hot enough to produce steam, hot enough to make her gasp with relief. Around her, the other women were reacting similarly. Some cried, some laughed. Margaret just stood under the spray with her eyes closed, months of tension visibly draining from her body. "This isn't possible," Frau Weber said, but even her voice had lost its suspicious edge. "They're wasting hot water on us, on prisoners. Why?" "Does it matter?" Another woman replied, soaping her hair with the provided soap. Real soap, not the harsh lye substitute they'd been given before. "Just accept it." But Helga understood Frau Weber's confusion. Everything they'd been taught said this shouldn't happen. The enemy didn't waste resources on prisoners. The enemy certainly didn't provide comfort to German captives while German soldiers were dying in the field, unless everything they'd been taught was wrong. The 20 minutes passed too quickly. When they emerged, clean and warm, wearing their new thermal undergarments beneath their prison dresses, the next group was waiting. The women's expressions ranged from skeptical to desperate with hope. "It's real," Margaret told them. "The hot water is real." Over the next 3 days, as all 37 women cycled through bathing rotation, the atmosphere in the barracks changed. The constant low-level fear, the conviction that winter would kill them, began to ease. They still didn't trust their captors completely, but they stopped expecting immediate cruelty. Then the first serious cold snap arrived. Temperatures plummeted to -10 Fahrenheit. Wind howled across the camp. Outside, guards rotated every 30 minutes to avoid frostbite. Inside the women's barracks, the radiators kept the temperature at 65 degrees. Comfortable, survivable, almost pleasant. "This doesn't make sense," Frau Weber said for the 100th time. "Fuel is expensive. Heating costs resources. Why waste it on prisoners?" "Because Americans are soft," one woman suggested. "They can't stand to see suffering." "Or because they're following rules," Helga said quietly. "The Geneva Convention, treaty obligations. Maybe they actually believe in those things." "No one actually follows the Geneva Convention. It's propaganda, theater." "Then what is this?" Helga gestured around the warm barracks, at the women wearing adequate clothing, at the reality that contradicted everything they'd believed. "If this is theater, who's the audience?" No one had an answer. Lieutenant Patterson made her daily rounds that evening, checking that radiators were functioning properly, that no one was sick, that supplies were adequate. "Lieutenant," Helga said carefully, "may I ask a question?" "Go ahead." "Why are you doing this?" "Truly, not the official answer, the real reason." Patterson considered for a moment. "You're human beings. You're our responsibility while you're in our custody. Letting you suffer when we can prevent it would make us the barbarians you were told we are." She paused. "Is that reason enough?" "I don't know. In Germany, we didn't treat prisoners this way." "I know. We've liberated some of your camps, seen how you treated Allied POWs. Patterson's voice was quiet but firm. "We're not you. That's the point." After she left, Margaret approached Helga. "Do you believe her? That they're doing this just because it's right?" "I'm starting to. Which terrifies me more than freezing would have." "Why?" "Because if the Americans are humane and we weren't, what does that make us? What side were we really on?" The question hung in the cold air, unanswerable and devastating. A week later, the Red Cross conducted their scheduled inspection. The inspector, a Swiss national named Herr Schmidt, interviewed prisoners privately, checked facilities, reviewed supply records. When he finished, he sought out Helga, who'd been designated the ranking prisoner. "I must say, this is one of the better maintained POW facilities I've inspected. Your conditions meet or exceed Geneva Convention standards." "Yes, sir." "Are you being mistreated in any way? Denied necessities? Forced into inappropriate labor?" Helga thought about the hot showers, the winter clothing, the heated barracks. "No, sir. We're being treated adequately." "Good. That's what we like to hear." He paused. "You seem troubled." "I am troubled. Because everything I was taught said this wouldn't happen, that Americans would be cruel. Instead, she struggled for words. "They're kind. It makes me question everything else I was taught." Schmidt nodded slowly. "That's the most honest thing any German prisoner has said to me in 2 years. Hold on to that doubt, Fräulein. It might be the thing that saves you when this war ends." The December brought even harsher cold. -20 became routine. Snow piled 5 feet high around the camp. Outside work details were cancelled, too dangerous in extreme temperatures. The prisoners spent days inside, warm and restless, adjusting to a captivity that felt nothing like what they'd imagined. But not everyone adjusted easily. A faction led by Frau Weber maintained that accepting American kindness was collaboration. that showing gratitude was betrayal, that they should remain coldly hostile despite the treatment they received. "We're Germans," Weber said during one of their barracks debates. "We don't bend to enemy manipulation. They're trying to make us weak, make us grateful, turn us against the Reich." "The Reich abandoned us," Margaret shot back. "We're prisoners because Germany's losing. Refusing to accept warm clothing and hot water doesn't make us loyal. It makes us stupid. It makes us principled. Principles won't keep us alive in Wisconsin winter." The conflict came to a head when Weber refused to attend her scheduled bath rotation. "I won't participate in their propaganda," she declared. "I won't let them pretend they're civilized while German soldiers die in the cold." Lieutenant Patterson dealt with it efficiently. "Frau Weber, bathing is mandatory. It's a health requirement, not a privilege. You'll attend your rotation, or you'll be placed in solitary confinement where you'll be bathed by force. Your choice." Weber attended, but she maintained her hostile silence throughout. Helga understood Weber's position. Holding on to hatred was easier than confronting uncomfortable truths. But she couldn't maintain that position herself, not when every day brought fresh evidence that maybe, possibly, they'd been on the wrong side all along. Christmas approached, and with it, an unexpected announcement. The camp was organizing a holiday program. German prisoners could attend a Christmas service, receive special holiday meals, and send letters home through the Red Cross. "It's manipulation," Weber insisted, "making us feel grateful so we'll speak well of our captors." "Or it's Christmas," Margaret replied, "and they're Christians too. Maybe they actually believe in the holiday." The Christmas service was held in the camp chapel, a simple building that served multiple denominations. Catholic, Protestant, even a few Jewish prisoners from other barracks attended their own services. The German women sat together uncertain as an army chaplain conducted the service in German. "Tonight we celebrate the birth of hope into a dark world," the chaplain said. "Regardless of what uniforms we wear, what nations we represent, we are all God's children. On this night, we remember that." Helga listened to familiar hymns sung in her native language by an enemy chaplain, and something inside her cracked. These weren't monsters. They were people who believed in the same God, celebrated the same holy days, showed mercy because their faith demanded it. And she'd spent years serving a regime that considered mercy weakness. After the service, special meals were served. Roast chicken, potatoes, vegetables, even a small dessert. Not extravagant, but better than normal rations. The women ate in confused silence, trying to reconcile holiday kindness from people they'd been taught to hate. "My father would be ashamed of me," Margaret said quietly. "For accepting this, for being grateful to the enemy." "Maybe your father was wrong," Helga replied. "Maybe mine was too. Maybe we were all wrong about everything." That night, Helga wrote her first letter home, a carefully worded message that would pass censors but still convey truth. She told her mother she was safe, warm, adequately fed. She said the Americans followed treaty obligations. She didn't say she was starting to question everything she'd believed about the war, but between the lines, she hoped her mother would understand. "I survived, and I'm learning that survival sometimes means accepting uncomfortable truths." January 1945. The war was clearly going badly for Germany. News filtered through. The Ardennes offensive had failed. Soviet forces were pushing into Poland. Berlin was being bombed nightly. Among the prisoners, reactions ranged from denial to quiet acceptance. Helga noticed the changes in herself. She no longer felt automatically defensive when Americans entered the barracks. She'd learned several guards' names, learned they had families, learned they were mostly decent people doing a difficult job. One guard, a sergeant named Mary O'Connor, whose brother had died at Normandy, actually befriended some of the prisoners. Helga asked her once, "How can you be kind to us? We're the enemy. Germans killed your brother." "My brother was killed by war," Mary replied. "Not by you specifically. And hatred doesn't bring him back. Being cruel to prisoners doesn't honor his memory. Treating you humanely, that's what he would have wanted. He was that kind of person. The logic was so foreign to everything Helga had been taught that she couldn't immediately process it. In Germany, revenge was expected. Cruelty to enemy prisoners was justified. Kindness was weakness. But Mary showed her something different. Strength that didn't require cruelty, honor that included mercy, patriotism that didn't demand hatred. By February, routine had fully established itself. Wake at 06:30, breakfast, morning work assignments, usually light indoor work, laundry, administrative tasks, lunch, afternoon free time, dinner, evening roll call, lights out at 2100. Twice weekly hot showers, weekly fresh clothing issue, monthly Red Cross inspections. It was boring, monotonous, safe, comfortable. Everything prison camp wasn't supposed to be. "I feel guilty," Margaret admitted one evening. "German soldiers are dying in the snow on the Eastern Front, and I'm warm. I have enough food. I take hot showers. How is that fair?" "It's not fair," Helga replied. "War isn't fair, but feeling guilty doesn't help anyone. We survived. We were captured instead of killed. We can't change that. But should we accept it? Should we be grateful to our captors? I don't know, but I know I'd rather be alive and questioning than dead and certain." The final confrontation with Frau Weber came in March. She'd been secretly organizing a resistance cell, women who refused to cooperate with any American requests, who maintained hostile silence, who saved scraps of food, planning some undefined escape. Lieutenant Patterson discovered it during a routine barracks inspection. "Frau Weber, you're being transferred to maximum security. Your faction can join you or remain here under current conditions. You can't separate us. Geneva Convention." The Geneva Convention allows isolation of prisoners who threaten camp security. "You've been planning escape, stockpiling supplies, organizing resistance. That's a security threat." Patterson's voice was tired, not angry. "I've tried to make your captivity bearable. You've responded with constant hostility. So now you get different accommodations." "Congratulations!" Weber and 3 others were transferred. The remaining prisoners breathed a collective sigh of relief. "Is it wrong that I'm glad she's gone?" Margarete asked. "No," Helga replied. "She was making everyone miserable out of principle. There's a difference between maintaining dignity and maintaining hatred." Spring came slowly to Wisconsin. Snow melted. Temperatures rose above freezing. The women were allowed outside for the first time in months, supervised recreation in the compound, fresh air, sunshine. Helga stood in the March sun, warm coat unbuttoned, face turned toward the light, and realized she'd survived. They all had. The winter that was supposed to kill them had passed with minimal suffering, thanks to enemies who'd chosen humanity over revenge. The war would end soon. Everyone knew it. Germany was collapsing, and then they'd face repatriation, return to a destroyed homeland, a defeated nation, a future uncertain and frightening. But Helga had learned something during the Wisconsin winter. Kindness wasn't weakness. The Americans had been strong enough to show mercy, secure enough to follow their principles even when their enemy hadn't. If you've stayed with us through this journey, subscribe and share this story. Sometimes the cruelest lies are the ones our own side tells us, and sometimes the enemy teaches us more about humanity than our leaders ever did. May 8, 1945. The announcement came over the camp's public address system at noon. "Germany has surrendered unconditionally. The war in Europe is over." Helga stood frozen in the barracks, the words not quite registering. Around her, the other women reacted in a spectrum of emotions, some crying, some silent, some collapsing onto their bunks as if strings had been cut. "It's over," Margaret whispered, her voice hollow. "We lost." "We survived," Helga corrected quietly. "That's what matters now." But survival felt complicated. Relief that the killing had stopped mixed with grief for a homeland destroyed, shame for what Germany had done, uncertainty about what came next. They were prisoners of a war that no longer existed, citizens of a nation that had ceased to exist in any recognizable form. Lieutenant Patterson gathered them that afternoon, her expression somber but not triumphant. "I know this is difficult news. You're probably feeling many conflicting emotions. That's normal. You're not required to celebrate. You're not required to mourn. You're allowed to simply feel whatever you feel." "What happens to us?" someone asked, voice trembling. "You remain here under prisoner status until repatriation can be arranged. Germany's infrastructure is destroyed. Millions are displaced. It will take time to organize transport and verify safe destinations." Patterson paused. "I won't lie to you. What you're returning to won't be the Germany you left, but you will go home eventually." That night, the barracks was silent, except for quiet crying. Helga lay in her bunk, the comfortable American bunk with clean sheets and warm blankets, and thought about home. Munich had been bombed repeatedly. Her apartment was likely rubble. Her parents, she hadn't heard from them in over a year. They could be dead, displaced in a refugee camp anywhere, and yet she was alive, warm, fed, safe, while her countrymen had frozen, starved, been bombed into oblivion. "Do you feel guilty?" Margaret asked from the next bunk, "for being comfortable while Germany burned?" "Every day. But guilt doesn't change anything. We didn't choose this. We were captured. We survived." Helga rolled over to face her. "The question isn't whether we should feel guilty. It's what we do with surviving." "What do you mean?" "We learned something here about how enemies can be humane, about how strength doesn't require cruelty. When we go back, we can't forget that. Germany needs to learn it too." Over the following weeks, news filtered in about Germany's devastation. Cities flattened, millions dead, the country divided into occupation zones, American, British, French, Soviet. The regime that had promised a 1,000-year Reich had lasted 12 years and left only rubble. Some prisoners clung to denial. The news was exaggerated. Germany would rise again. The Führer had been misunderstood. But most, like Helga, simply tried to process the magnitude of what had happened. Red Cross workers arrived to interview prisoners about their families, trying to locate relatives, verify addresses, arrange eventual reunions. Helga gave them her parents' last known address in Munich, knowing it probably didn't exist anymore. "Even if the building's destroyed, we'll search refugee registries," the worker assured her. "If your parents are alive, we'll find them." The waiting was agonizing. Weeks turned into months with no word. Helga threw herself into camp routines, helping with administrative work, teaching younger prisoners English, preparing for a future she couldn't quite imagine. Lieutenant Patterson noticed. "You're avoiding thinking about repatriation." "I'm preparing for it. You're terrified of it. There's a difference." Patterson sat down across from Helga in the administrative office where they both work now. "It's okay to be afraid. You're going back to a country that doesn't exist anymore, to look for a family that might be gone, to build a life in ruins. Then why send us back? Why not let us stay here where it's safe? Because this isn't your home. No matter how comfortable we make you, you're still a prisoner. You deserve the chance to be free, even if freedom is harder than captivity." Helga understood the logic, but part of her wanted to stay in this strange limbo, neither German nor American, neither free nor fully imprisoned, suspended in a space where she didn't have to confront what Germany had become. But June brought news. The Red Cross had located her mother, alive, in a displaced persons camp outside Munich, waiting for word about her daughter. Helga cried for an hour when she received the letter. Relief, joy, and terror mixed together. Her mother was alive, but she was in a refugee camp. Everything was gone. And soon, Helga would have to go back and face it all. August 1945. The first group of repatriation orders came through, 10 women scheduled for transport to Germany in September. Helga wasn't among them. Her repatriation was scheduled for October, giving her time to exchange letters with her mother to prepare mentally for return. The letters were heartbreaking. Her mother described Munich in brief, careful phrases that conveyed devastation without drowning in it. The apartment is gone. Father died in an air raid, 1943. I'm living in a camp with thousands of others. But I'm alive, and soon you'll come home. Helga read that line, "Father died in an air raid," over and over until the words lost meaning. Her father, dead for 2 years, killed by the same American bombs that came from the same American military that now fed her, clothed her, kept her warm. How did she reconcile that? How did anyone reconcile any of this? "I don't know how to feel," she admitted to Margaret, whose repatriation was scheduled for the same October transport. "The Americans killed my father, but they also saved my life. Which matters more? Both matter. Neither cancels the other." Margaret folded her own letter from home. Her family's farm was occupied by Russian forces. Her parents fled west into the American zone. War destroys everything, but what happens after war, that's what defines us. The women scheduled for September departure, prepared with a mixture of eagerness and dread. They were going home. But home was rubble and occupation and uncertainty. Still, it was home. Helga watched them leave. 10 women climbing into trucks that would take them to ships, then to Germany, then to whatever waited there. Some were crying. Some looked determined. All looked frightened. "That'll be us in 2 months," Margaret said. "Are you ready?" "No, but I don't think anyone is." September and October crawled by. Helga continued her routine, work, meals, the weekly hot shower that still felt like luxury, the heated barracks that still felt like kindness. She was storing up these small comforts against the hardship she knew was coming. Lieutenant Patterson called her in one final time before departure. "I wanted to give you something." She handed Helga a small package. "Your winter coat. And some extra supplies, soap, a blanket, basic medical items. You'll need them." "Lieutenant, I can't. These are military supplies. These are supplies we're giving to a civilian returning to a destroyed country. Accept them, Helga. You're not a prisoner anymore. You're a woman going home to help rebuild. You'll need every advantage you can get." Helga took the package, her throat tight. "Why are you doing this? After everything Germany did, after all the destruction?" Patterson was quiet for a moment, because somebody has to break the cycle. Germany taught hatred and cruelty. We can teach something different. Maybe you'll remember that when you're rebuilding your country. Maybe you'll build something better. I'll try. That's all anyone can do. October 15th, 1945. 23 German women prisoners, Helga and Margaret among them, climbed into trucks for the last time. The guards who'd watched them for over a year stood at attention, not hostile, not friendly, just professional, doing their duty. Mary O'Connor, the sergeant whose brother had died at Normandy, approached Helga one last time. "Good luck over there. I hope you find what you're looking for. Thank you for everything, for treating us like people. You are people. That never changed." Mary shook her hand formally. "Build something good, Helga. Make it worth surviving." The truck rolled through the camp gates for the last time. Helga looked back at the barracks where she'd spent nearly a year, where she'd survived Wisconsin winter, where she'd learned that enemies could show mercy. Then the gates closed behind them, and the journey home began. The ship crossing was rough, crowded with repatriating prisoners and displaced persons. Helga spent most of the journey on deck, watching America disappear behind her and Europe approach ahead. "Strange, isn't it?" Margaret said, appearing beside her. "We're leaving captivity for freedom, but captivity was comfortable, and freedom will be hard. That's what war does. It inverts everything." Oh, they arrived at Bremen in late October, a port city that had been bombed into near oblivion, now slowly beginning to function under British occupation. The processing took days. Paperwork, medical checks, interviews, documentation. Former prisoners being transformed back into civilians. When Helga finally received her discharge papers and travel permit to Munich, she felt no triumph, just exhaustion and apprehension. The train journey through Germany was devastating. Every city showed scars. Some were barely recognizable. Whole districts flattened, populations living in rubble, women and children digging through ruins, old men trying to clear streets, everyone thin, exhausted, defeated. This was what her father had died for. This was what the 1,000-year Reich had delivered. Munich was worse than she'd imagined. The beautiful city of her childhood was a skeleton. The apartment building where she'd grown up was a pile of bricks. The displaced persons camp where her mother waited was a sea of tents and temporary structures housing thousands. Finding her mother took 2 hours of searching through registry lists. When Helga finally saw her, aged decades, thin, worn but alive, they both broke down. They held each other in silence for several minutes before either could speak. "You're so thin," her mother finally said, pulling back to study Helga's face. "Were they cruel? Did the Americans hurt you?" Helga thought about hot showers in the middle of winter, about heated barracks when she'd expected to freeze, about Lieutenant Patterson and Mary O'Connor, and all the small acts of humanity that had kept her alive and sane. "No, Mama, they weren't cruel." She pulled her American-issued coat tighter, the coat she'd wear for the next 30 years. "They were kind, and that kindness taught me something important." "What?" "That we were on the wrong side. That everything we were told about strength and superiority and enemies was a lie." Helga looked around at the ruined city, the shattered nation. The Americans were stronger than us, not because they had more weapons, because they had more humanity. Her mother absorbed this, then nodded slowly. I wondered, after everything, after the bombings and the defeat and hearing what we did to other people, I wondered if we'd been lied to about everything. We were. About the enemy, about ourselves, about what strength really means. They stood together in the ruins of Munich, two survivors trying to understand how to live in a world that had destroyed itself. "What do we do now?" her mother asked. "We rebuild. We start over. We try to build something better than what was destroyed." Helga touched the American coat she wore. "And we remember that mercy isn't weakness, that treating enemies with humanity isn't defeat, that sometimes the people we're taught to hate teach us the most important lessons." Over the following years, Helga worked in reconstruction efforts, helping organize refugee services, translating for American occupation forces, teaching others the English she'd learned in captivity. She married a fellow survivor, had 3 children, helped build a new Germany from the ashes of the old. She kept the winter coat Lieutenant Patterson had given her until she died at 73. On cold winter days, she'd wear it and remember the lesson it represented, that she'd expected cruelty and received kindness, expected to freeze and was kept warm, expected enemies and found human beings. Her children asked about it once. "Why do you keep that old American coat? Why not buy a new one?" "Because it reminds me of something important," Helga replied. "During the war, I was taught that Americans were our enemies, that they would be cruel, that showing mercy was weakness. This coat proves all of that was a lie. What did it prove instead? That real strength includes mercy, that humanity transcends nationality, that sometimes the people we're told to hate teach us the most important truths about kindness." She told her children about the Wisconsin winter, about expecting to die and being saved, about hot showers and heated barracks and enemy guards who showed compassion, about Lieutenant Patterson's quiet dignity and Mary O'Connor's forgiveness despite her brother's death. "They didn't have to treat us well," Helga explained. "They could have let us freeze, could have been cruel, could have taken revenge for everything Germany did. Instead, they followed their principles. They showed us what real civilization looks like." Her children listened, absorbing lessons their mother had learned in captivity. That enemies aren't always evil, that kindness isn't weakness, that mercy is often the hardest and most important choice. Helga Schneider died in 1998, 53 years after the Wisconsin winter that changed her life. At her funeral, her daughter read from one of Helga's letters. "I learned more about humanity from my enemies than I ever learned from my own leaders. They taught me that strength and kindness aren't opposites. They're the same thing." The American winter coat was donated to a museum of the war, where it sits today with a placard explaining its significance. Worn by a German POW who expected to freeze and was instead shown mercy, a reminder that even in war's darkest moments, humanity persists in unexpected places. And on cold winter days, when visitors see that coat, some remember the greatest victories aren't always military. Sometimes they're moral. Sometimes they're as simple as choosing kindness over cruelty, mercy over revenge, humanity over hatred. Sometimes the enemy teaches you what your own side never could. Thank you for experiencing this journey through unexpected humanity. During WFU, thousands of German POWs were held in American camps under Geneva Convention standards. While experiences varied, many prisoners encountered treatment that contradicted everything they'd been taught about their enemies. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs reminding that our greatest strength often lies not in how we treat friends, but in how we treat enemies. History teaches us that mercy isn't weakness, it's the foundation of lasting peace.